Aloha and welcome to the 8th Annual Hawaii Energy Conference, presented by Maui Economic Development Board, with support from the Maui County Office of Economic Development. Please welcome MEDB's President and CEO, Leslie Wilkins.
And on behalf of Maui Economic Development Board, welcome to the 8th Annual Hawaii Energy Conference. We are broadcasting live from our home in the Maui Research and Technology Park. We would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the County of Maui for its continuing support of this event. As is customary for our annual gathering, we take time to reflect on our journey this morning and again on Thursday morning, with special focus on our responsibilities to the life of the land and its people. We now invite our dear friend, Mr. Clifford Naole, who is the cultural advisor to the Ritz-Carlton in Kapalua, to provide us with a pule or prayer in the form of an oli or chant, followed by words of guidance and inspiration to open our proceedings.
Aloha kakiaka kako. Once again, in the traditions of our people. E nau makua mai kalahiki a kalakau, mai ka pailuna ka pailalu. E nau makua I ka pō, e nau makua I ke au. Nā tupuna a pala ka pō, pana puka I ke au. E ho mahe I ke, ho mahe lo anui. A ka pula no anu I ke au nei. E ola e. A mama ua noa. Lele vale kia puli o kalani. Aloha and good morning to all of you. Once again, you gather upon the shores of this beautiful place called Maui. And you hui. You gather as one. Collectively for one cause, and that is to provide for the betterment of mankind and find energy sources. Make sure that everything is in order so that our children, our grandchildren, everyone forward can live with a balance of the world. He motu he wa he motu. The island is our canoe. The canoe is our island, and we need to treat it that way. The first step that you should acknowledge is the fact that all of you are hui. You gather together to represent a universal canoe. The next step is to understand that each of you have your own canoe. And as a matter of respect, cultural respect, the canoe runs this way. And each seat within that canoe is filled with only the best people that you want on that crew. You have the opportunity to design that crew. You will represent a fleet of voyaging canoes going to one goal, and that is sustainable energy. Respect each of those who sit in those seats. The chain of command goes this way. Everyone listens. You have to listen to each other first, and then discuss, and then move forward with your goals. And trust me, with a crew that works together in good timing, with better understanding, your canoe can go from A to Z much more quickly, much more smoother. And yes, challenges will come. And when that comes, you say to yourself, hapai kahoi, lift your paddles as high as you can. Because at that instant, the higher you lift your paddle, the deeper you will dig. And you will kuli a canoe. You will get that canoe over the highest waves possible. Challenges will come. It's understood. But you as an individual, as a team, as a universal canoe, as a fleet of voyaging canoes can accomplish this. Look to the future, respect each other within your canoes, listen, discuss, understand, share, decide. The future is ours. The navigator chose every opportunity they could through nature, through thinking, to guide them on a better path. They were always looking to stars, the oceans, the currents. Like you will look to ideas, you will look to sources. All of these things are part of the recipe for success. This is what the navigators of old did to be successful, to get across the ocean, the vast expansion of the ocean, to here. If we look at your challenge as the Pacific Ocean, for the Hawaiian, it was not a great divide. is a great connector. You are being connected by the single source of energy for the future of mankind. So I leave you with this thought. Focus, ask for wisdom, listen, not only to what you can hear in front of you, but what you hear inside of you. E ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no iau. O nā mele e ho mai. E ho mai. E ho mai e. Ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no iau nā mele e ho mai. E ho mai. E ho mai e ho mai kai ke mai luna mai e o nā mea huna no iau o nā mele e ho mai e ho mai e ho mai e ua noa. Focus, wisdom, aloha.
Thank you, Clifford, for opening both our minds and our hearts to the gifts offered to us during our time together. At this year's conference, we will explore our theme, which is the energy transition in Hawaii, focus on investments in people and our projects. The word investment is used in its broadest sense and includes, besides financial capital, our cultural, social, and human capital. We all know that every community in the U.S. and throughout the world must invest in and draw upon the knowledge, understanding, and skills of our people to build a clean, secure, resilient, and sustainable energy future. First of all, I'd like to say mahalo to our program committee. Today's program would not be possible without the hard work and dedication of our program committee. They hammered out the theme, chose the panel topics, recruited speakers, and many of them are moderating panels. We are proud of the work they have done to put together a program that is as diverse and multifaceted as the people who call Hawaii Nei home. Also, mahalo to our sponsors. We would like to extend a heartfelt mahalo, and our conference team will tell you that putting on a virtual conference is more than just organizing a simple Zoom call. There are multiple layers and resources that are brought to bear, and we thank our sponsors for supporting this effort. First of all, we would like to say thank you to our champion level sponsors, Hawaiian Electric, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, and Ulapono Initiative. Our stakeholder sponsor level includes Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, Progression Hawaii Offshore Wind, and Swell Energy. And our advocate sponsor level includes AES, Burns McDonnell, Cambrian, and Elemental Accelerator. Mahalo to our exhibitors. We have designated times throughout the conference days to network with exhibitors. Please visit the exhibit hall to learn about the latest projects and offerings by our exhibitors. Connect with company representatives via chat or video, or schedule an appointment for a time that is convenient for you. Now let's take a look at who all is here attending, where we live, and what industries we are working in. So our attendees by locale are Maui Island, 18%, neighbor islands, 67%. And just a note, neighbor islands include Oahu, since we are broadcasting from Maui. Continental U.S., 12%, which ranges from California to New York. International attendance is 3%, which includes Canada and Denmark. By Hawaii locale, Kauai is 4%, Hawaii Island 5%, Maui County 22%, and Oahu 69%. And then to take a look by industry representation, commercial and industry is 29%, education 4%, investment 4%, nonprofit 3%, other 16%, the regulatory and policy 26%, and utility 18%. We would like to encourage and invite you to please be part of the conversation and discussion. We encourage you to ask the speakers questions using the question tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and to help upvote questions you want to hear asked by clicking the heart icon. Enjoy networking with fellow attendees by visiting the Attendees tab to connect via chat or video. Keep the conversation going on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag HEC 2021 and participate in social media competitions. Connect with sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual exhibit hall. So we're also going to ask you, how do we do? Take the daily survey to be in the running for a $25 gift card. So compete is important. So to do so, click the Compete tab to access. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our very, very hardworking team of leaders who will be your hosts throughout the event. First of all, I would like to introduce our program committee chair, Doug McLeod, and our vice chair, Frank Rego. Thank you, and congratulations on your hard work.
Mahalo, Leslie, and mahalo to all of you for your willingness to spend your valuable time with us. Throughout the rest of today and Thursday, Frank and I will be providing some commentary, doing some introductions to speakers, and trying to encourage you all to ask questions. I'm going to do the introduction for our keynote in a few minutes, but I wanted to let Frank make a quick introduction himself. Frank?
You know, Doug, Clifford and I only at the end of his thoughts on our hui, our ability to unite and move in a direction, shared the chant, "KOMO Mai," grant us. The first two stanzas of that chant in English say, grant us knowledge from above, the ike, the knowledge or wisdom hidden in our songs. My wish for all of us is that what is hidden may be revealed through our presentations and our conversations, which for us will be the mele, the songs we sing today. Mahalo. So Doug, I'm going to pass it back over to you to introduce our keynote.
Thanks, Frank. We're going to begin this morning with a really interesting presentation about virtual power plants. And our keynote speaker is Suleiman Khan. He's the CEO of Swell. And we're really excited to have him, not just because they're doing a program that's interesting in Hawaii, but also because his vision of what we may be able to do with virtual power plants. And you know, you're going to be hearing acronyms for the next few days, but VPPs, that's going to be our discussion topic here. And you know, what I would just say as we get ready to listen to him is that when people started putting batteries in their homes, they really weren't grid assets. You know, they were things that people were doing thinking of their own home, either to keep the power on, or they had some solar power that they didn't like giving back to the utility. It was, I mean, selfish is a bad word, but it was really thinking based on the individual home level. And the virtual power plant, you know, at its base level is the idea that if we combine enough batteries in different people's homes, that we can effectively have a power plant. And what Suleiman has to say is really interesting because, again, his vision is so much broader than where we started on batteries. So with that, I'm happy to turn this over to Suleiman. I do want to encourage all of you, however, that questions are an important part of what we do here. And on the right side of the tab, you'll see that you can give us questions. We prefer that you start writing those now and not wait until the end of the presentation. So if you have a good question, please go ahead and start asking those in writing now. And again, with no further ado, it's a great pleasure to turn this over to Suleiman Khan.
Thank you. I trust that you all can hear me. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Clifford, for that remarkably inspiring introduction. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Doug. I hope I can live up to this fantastic start of this conference. I'm thrilled to be here today, and aloha, everyone. Thank you for having me here among you all today and for joining us this morning as we kick off the 8th Annual Hawaii Energy Conference. I'm sincerely so very honored to be a part of this conference, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of my perspectives and my team's perspectives with you all today. I'm similarly excited to be part of the ongoing cross-island conversations outside of this conference related to establishing practical and sustainable solutions for Hawaii's transition towards renewable energy and energy self-sufficiency. The formal title of my keynote speech today is Creating Transformative and Inclusive Investment Opportunities with Virtual Power Plants. And I hope that as we go through this, the notion of transformation in an inclusive manner and in a manner that really compels investment within renewables is something that we all can walk away with. My notes for this talk really center on how we can go about expanding the network of distributed energy resources, such as solar-powered batteries, across Hawaii in a manner that allows us to, number one, maximize the utilization and value of these distributed energy resources, while number two, also ensuring that this energy transition happens in an equitable manner across communities and people. Let's first talk about Hawaii and its energy transition. And it's fantastic to see the constituency that is attending this conference. Before we go on, I think it is quite important for us to acknowledge that Hawaii has long been a forerunner with respect to the global renewable energy transition, as demonstrated in concert by the island's utilities, regulators, and energy consumers. The state's commitment to utilizing 100% renewable energy by the year 2045 is a clear indication of this, in our opinion, as are the measures that we see from the utilities in response to this mandate. Furthermore, individuals and communities within Hawaii have played a key part in this ongoing transition by leading the nation in rooftop solar adoption. Today, as many of you know, over 30% of all single-family homes in Hawaii already have rooftop solar. And in 2020, nearly half of Hawaii's renewable energy production came from rooftop solar, which, by the way, enabled the utility to surpass its targeted renewable portfolio standards for the year. They say that necessity is the parent of invention and adaptation. And of course, Hawaii's unique location and energy circumstance has played a key role in catalyzing this transition to distributed energy resources. Nonetheless, this accelerated path to renewable distributed energy that communities in Hawaii have embarked upon is incredible and is commendable. And I'll tell you that mainland folks are learning from it in scores. This accelerated transition to distributed energy resources also highlights the crucial role that residential and commercial DERs will continue to play in enabling a 100% renewable future for Hawaii. So fast forward a bit to the present day, and what we see in Hawaii is that both the regulators and the utilities are doubling down on behind-the-meter distributed energy resources by charging forward on the mass adoption of behind-the-meter energy storage. Over the course of 2020 and 2021, we've seen the emergence of several new programs designed to incentivize the accelerated adoption of energy storage by residential and commercial customers. We know that when energy storage is paired with rooftop solar, it adds resiliency for both the customer as well as the grid as a whole. And regulators and utilities in Hawaii seem keen to make avail of this complementarity. I'll also take this opportunity to point out that some of these programs that have been launched in Hawaii are taking the form of virtual power plants, the topic of my talk today, and represent a transformative approach to addressing Hawaii's energy transition. So this is all great, but in the midst of this praiseworthy progress, there's a key point to be made about exactly how we incentivize and deploy distributed energy resources across the islands to ubiquitous levels. And the rapid and expansive deployment of decentralized energy resources can be one of the most efficient ways to effect this transition to renewable energy. We must ensure that this evolution happens in a manner that is equitable across communities. This is where virtual power plants come into the picture. A quick overview of virtual power plants is merited here. Virtual power plants, or VPPs, help in building a decarbonized, decentralized, and digitized grid in a way that benefits the various stakeholder groups in concert. This includes consumers, utilities, and we would add financiers. Put simply, a virtual power plant is an aggregated network of distributed solar and energy storage resources that can be centrally controlled by a grid operator and an aggregator instead or in the place of a traditional centralized power plant. You may hear many of us at Swell refer to virtual power plants as distributed power plants, because really, that's truly what they are. They also allow consumers to participate in a two-way transactive process of generating and consuming energy to and from the grid. Unlike the past, where energy has traditionally been a one-way flow, virtual power plants do allow for transactive energy between the customer and the utility. And this is key to the transformative value of VPPs and their relevance in particular to equitable deployment of renewables. It does, in effect, represent somewhat of a power shift or a power flattening across the various constituents on the grid. If we all agree that the energy circumstance in Hawaii requires innovative solutions, then we must acknowledge that these distributed energy resources, aggregated in the form of virtual power plants, can help ensure that distributed energy resources work together for the greater good of the grid and the various communities it serves. So perhaps a quick introduction on the work that me and my colleagues at Swell Energy are doing, along with a mandate that drives our core business. And I'll be brief here. As CEO of Swell Energy, I've been charged by my team to establish ways to further integrate distributed energy resources onto our nation's various grid networks in a manner, as I said, that aligns the interest of consumers, utilities, regulators, and financiers. At the highest level, Swell Energy itself is a smart energy and grid solutions company that connects property owners, industry partners, utilities, finance providers, and regulators behind the shared goal of achieving reliable, cost-effective, clean, equitable, flexible energy through the development and ongoing operation of virtual power plants. By creating a critical mass of dynamic and responsive clean energy resources, such as solar and energy storage, within specific utility areas, Swell Energy delivers resilient virtual power plant networks and grid balancing services to utilities, which are fundamental to a carbon-free distributed renewable energy system. Our mission is to accelerate the mass adoption of distributed clean energy technologies by making it easy for consumers to take control of their energy use and achieve energy security and lower costs. We will now kind of dive into what we believe the intrinsic value of VPPs are. With the propagation of distributed energy storage, as we've seen in Hawaii, the intrinsic value and investment outlook for these resources is rapidly changing, and hence the title of this keynote, which is Transformative Investment Opportunities. The ability to aggregate thousands of DERs into a centralized virtual power plant is finally allowing for meaningful inclusion of renewable energy DERs into the resource planning, grid operations, and energy portfolios of utility and key markets across the US, not just Hawaii. Additionally, the recent commissioning of several high-capacity and high-profile VPPs has introduced a new asset class to the capital markets. And I think this is a key point that I'd love to speak about in the Q&A session as well. Technical innovation has led to financial innovation and is now redefining how we finance DERs as VPP portfolios. We no longer are viewing these as individual isolated assets. We're viewing them as nodes within a congregate virtual power plant. With this comes the opportunity to reshape the energy landscape over the next decade in a manner that we believe really does away with the limitations of intermittency that we typically, and temporal generation that we've typically seen with renewables. And it reduces, in our opinion, the need for centralized power plants. It preserves open space and habitat, to the point that was made earlier as we opened this session. And it's inclusive, in our opinion, in its benefits across the socioeconomic spectrum. All of these are virtues that we believe inherently exist with behind-the-meter solar, as well as behind-the-meter solar plus storage. But we believe that all of these virtues are amplified with aggregation of these resources into a virtual power plant. From an energy empowerment standpoint, VPPs are inherently communal, allowing for DERs to be owned by individuals and democratize transactive energy in a manner that begins to levelize the power dynamic, no pun intended, between utilities and customers. The transformative and inclusive nature of this new investment approach is best exemplified within market constructs that allow VPP developers to monetize grid services to utilities and to participate in wholesale energy markets, resulting in more efficient capital markets execution to ultimately bring down the cost of DER ownership within energy vulnerable communities. With a formulaic approach to climate policy, regulatory frameworks, utility innovation, and capital markets participation, VPPs are capable of creating transformative and inclusive change in how we all generate, consume, and pay for our energy in the years to come. Swell Energy, in context of Hawaii, is working with Hawaiian Electric and various critical local developers on the various islands to deploy behind-the-meter solar-powered home batteries to approximately 6,000 residential customers to create a comprehensive VPP on Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii Islands. The VPP will deliver more than 25 megawatts of solar power paired with over 100 megawatt hours of stored energy, providing critical capacity and frequency response to the 3 island grids. As it is fully developed over the next 2 years, this VPP is designed to serve 3 main functions as the renewable energy storage systems will collectively respond to grid needs dynamically moment to moment. Swell is also establishing VPPs in New York City with Con Edison and across California with Southern California Edison and other utilities in that state to provide various grid services such as resource adequacy, wholesale energy cost optimization, wholesale demand charge optimization, and the establishment of non-wire solutions for utilities. All of these intended to support growth in electricity demand, which is happening, while facilitating the shift away from fossil fuel-based energy production. So why are VPPs a great investment opportunity for Hawaii? First, VPPs present an opportunity to reshape the energy landscape over the next decade, reducing the need for centralized power plants, preserving open space and habitat, and being inclusive in their benefits across the socioeconomic spectrum, as we mentioned. And this is critical when you think about investors who are looking not just for a financial return, but a financial return complemented with triple bottom line outcomes and inclusively addressing swaths across the communities that these VPPs serve. As you all know better than myself, the equitable impact of project development is particularly critical in Hawaii. Islands are among the first groups to feel the consequences of climate change, evident through rising sea levels, extreme weather, even though they are relatively small contributors to climate change compared to their mainland counterparts. Additionally, land is a limited and precious resource. It is important to focus on leveraging existing assets like homes and businesses rather than building new centralized power infrastructure to the extent possible while supporting climate goals. With VPPs, utilities can fortify the electric grid without the need to build centralized fossil fuel resources, which accelerates our transition to a low carbon economy. So bottom line being, if you have a rooftop in an area where land is scarce, there's a way to make avail of that existing footprint to establish aggregated power plants. Distributed energy resources address these unique needs. They increase resiliency for disadvantaged communities and underserved communities and can support the transition away from fossil fuels en masse. And new incentives and pricing structures make them more accessible than ever. And then finally, we think about how VPPs contribute to an equitable energy transition. We are at a critical juncture for developing energy systems of the future with ESG investments. We are seeing this across the board. That's what makes this movement, this conference, this industry extremely exciting, extremely interesting, and frankly, challenging. With developing the next generation of electricity generation, transmission, and distribution, we must balance this and integrate it with economic, social, environmental factors to provide an equitable solution for all across the board. From an energy empowerment standpoint, VPPs are inherently communal, as we discussed. They democratize transactive energy and really allow homeowners and business owners to participate in the energy economy. So technology is not the limiting factor here to achieving this vision. It's business models, it's regulatory factors, it's utility progressiveness and utility programs, which we are seeing in Hawaii and various parts of the mainland, and outdated views, and it's about kind of squashing outdated views about what's possible, right? I'm looking forward to playing a small part, and me and my team are looking forward to playing a small part in creating a greater grid for the greater good in Hawaii, with Swell's work with Hawaiian Electric and local project developers like Revolution, Rising Sun, and many others. Truly appreciate the time to share my perspective with you all today, and I'd be thrilled to discuss any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Suleiman. We really appreciate that. We do have quite a few questions for you. So if it's possible that you could keep your answers to 1 or 2 minutes on the individual questions, it'd be great. There are a couple that have come in and they're really asking for the Hawaii project. Can you kind of explain the business model and specifically who's getting paid by the utility here? Is it Swell? Is it the homeowner? What's the rate structure? Are you fitting in within a tariff or is this a pilot outside of a tariff? So those questions are coming up first is, how does this business model work in your pilot?
Sure. And let me address, you kind of hit on 2 or 3 different aspects of the business model or the execution model, one might say, including the homeowner side of it, the utility side of it, and the aggregator side of it as well. There's obviously a 4th party here, which are local installers and local developers who we consider to be kind of VPP co-developers. So I'll briefly talk about the HECO program and how it's being implemented. Number 1, yes, it is compatible. Being that it's a 6,000 home project, we don't necessarily consider it a pilot, although we do believe there will be some tremendous learnings from it for future programs across the islands and on the mainland. So from that standpoint, one could think of it as early days, an early program, but I wonder whether one could call it a pilot. However, if you think about the way HECO is instituting this, we found it to be remarkably, I would say, efficacious. So Swell Energy enters into virtual power plant contracts of different types. In some cases, a utility is looking to us truly as a power plant operator. It just happens to be a distributed power plant. And many of those cases you see on the mainland. What is happening in Hawaii is rather interesting. HECO is viewing us as an administrator, an operator of kind of a virtual power plant that belongs to the islands. And this is reflected in the payment streams from the VPP resource. So what you see is that the homeowners are being paid directly by HECO for enrolling into this program. And Swell Energy receives a VPP development and management fee, right? So our job is to bring all these homeowners together, make sure that with the help of local installers and our VPP co-developers on the ground, we manage to get the requisite capacity in place. As we do that, HECO rewards homeowners for participating in this program and provides Swell Energy with residual income associated with launching this program, managing this program to cover our costs. And we love this model. We like it a lot because you can see a direct benefit to the homeowners that's very well defined from the get-go. And homeowners have a very clear sense of what their participation will bring them. And Swell, is serving as a humble conduit in all of this by bringing all of these together for a fee. I hope that's helpful. To make one last point on that, we are seeing new programs come about on the islands as well, which we appreciate. We think that these new programs are going to be key to expanding, the VPP concept across the island. And our program with HECO is compatible with these various new programs and with the tariffs that are in place.
Thank you, Suleiman. I know we've got a couple of questions that have come up that are focused on security risks, and I think we're talking about cybersecurity here. And in particular, what's the hacking risk of someone with your system if all these distributed resources are being managed, by your company? So how do you all address that? Is that your risk? Is that HECO's risk? How's that risk handled?
Through a very, very stringent set of requirements that HECO has imposed on the program, right? So if you think about it from a utility's perspective, any utility, whether it be in Hawaii or the mainland, they are viewing these virtual power plants or aggregated power plants in a very similar manner to how they're viewing centralized power plants. And so the same security protocol that they require of centralized power plants are being required of these distributed power plants. Now, what's great is that if you look at the various battery OEMs, this is something that was expected, and this is something that over the past several years, various battery OEMs and Swell has been working on. So I would say that, you can consider the risks to be similar to centralized power plant risks, with the exception that there are thousands of these in play. But the mitigants and the steps that are being taken to make sure that these systems are not vulnerable to any security risk are absolutely being put into place. And I would say that this was kind of central and early days to the establishment and the rollout of this program. It was one of the first things that the utilities and Swell looked at as we kind of approached how we would execute this program.
We've had a couple of questions that seized on this word accelerate. And you mentioned the possibility that VPPs can accelerate a transition in Hawaii. So I think the question is, are you thinking that VPPs can actually get us to the specific RPS numbers earlier in time than is required?
I think the key, perhaps, we would argue so, but I think you take a couple of steps back to understand, what has potentially, be it on the mainland or in Hawaii, restricted the unabated deployment of renewables. And I think that you'll find that there hasn't necessarily always been full alignment. This is a generalized statement, not specific to Hawaii, but there hasn't been necessarily alignment between the utilities, the consumers, and for that matter, financiers of these assets in a manner that you can create with VPPs, right? So what we are saying is that when you start looking at these assets as assets that utilities can actually benefit from, then all of a sudden you start dropping the barriers to deployment by aligning the use cases between utilities and consumers.
Thanks, Suma. I think we're going to try to wrap it up here, but I've got one or two last questions, and they're specific to numbers. So how many virtual power plants are there in Hawaii, and how many are there in the mainland U.S. that you would call a full virtual power plant?
Oh boy, the definition of virtual power plant, nobody owns that definition. Swell certainly doesn't claim to have a monopoly on that definition. I think you will find companies that view distributed thermostat behavioral control as a power plant, right? And we honor that definition. You'll see other companies that stick very strictly to the definition of virtual power plant being something that is associated with solar generation and a battery aggregated among many hundreds or many thousands of individual assets. Based on the definition and based on whether you're looking at pilots or whether you're looking at kind of broad scale launches, I would say probably, up to a dozen, perhaps, maybe more. Swell Energy currently has announced 5 virtual power plant programs, so we have a few more that we'll be announcing over the course of the next several quarters. Our definition of these virtual power plants really relate to being able to align the utilities use case and the homeowner's use case, being able to create a two-way transactive grid where consumers can, really bring down the cost of ownership by not only utilizing these batteries for their own use case, but also monetizing them with the utility and the wholesale markets, right? So if you think about an aggregated set of resources that can access the wholesale markets and or present itself to the utilities as a resource, capital R resource, thereby bringing down the cost of ownership to the homeowner or the business, that to us constitutes a virtual power plant. And in Hawaii, there are a few that exist also. I think ours may be on the larger side, although I think all the VPPs that exist and all those that are to come are equally important and critical to making this transition happen.
Does your technology work with all of the different battery manufacturers, or is your technology specific to Tesla?
No, we are expanding. There are kind of two parts to that question. Number one, the rollout of different batteries and different OEMs coming to market. So we're seeing 2020, 2019, 2020, really, and 2021 being years of fantastic introduction of new products. And it's not just batteries. There's also EV charging, right? And kind of managing and modulating that resource. And so we are striving to develop a technology that basically caters to all batteries that utilities deem appropriate for the grid, as well as non-battery resources. It'll be some quarters before all of that integration is done, but absolutely the idea is to have a virtual power plant that is inclusive of multiple battery, across North America, multiple batteries and multiple resource types.
You've talked about inclusive several times, and I saw a question where folks are asking, inclusive, are you thinking about socioeconomics here? Is there something about your project that makes it more likely these batteries would be in low and moderate income homes? I think just some question there, understanding, is there something specific about your project that's going to have these batteries in different types of homes than other projects?
Well, I would say, depending on the VPP that you're looking at across the U.S., so some of our virtual power plant programs are very much catered to and targeting the DAC sector, the disadvantaged community sector. And we do view it as a sector. I think once you start viewing the disadvantaged community sector as a sector, you start thinking about how to approach it in a cohesive manner. You start thinking about financing it and approaching capital markets to finance these systems. So yes, absolutely. On the mainland in particular, some of our virtual power plants are catering towards the DAC sector. In Hawaii, I would say generally, the idea is to bring down the cost of ownership, right? And anytime you can bring down the cost of ownership, you can take the deployment of this asset further down what they call the credit curve or the affordability curve. So one might say that that's more of a generalized, way of making it inclusive. But I do believe that it does address certain things. I'll give you another example. Net energy metering obviously is one of the things that has been truly beneficial to the deployment of behind the meter storage. And we at Swell are proponents of net energy metering, obviously, but also understand that you have to take into consideration the potential externalities that may exist with net energy metering. And so we think that there is a way for net energy metering to find a very sustainable, permanent, structure when you incorporate batteries and virtual power plants into it. So one could say that we're doing two things. We're bringing down the cost of ownership of distributed energy resources, number one. Number two, we're trying to help the entire system, to which net energy metering is critical. We're trying to help that entire system, that entire framework, by associating VPPs onto the grid.
One last question. If your project succeeds, knowing that we already have 30% of the homes with solar, long term, do you become a competitor to the utility?
No, I don't believe so. A lot of folks kind of talk about, irrespective of industry, a lot of folks talk about being the Uber of this or the Uber of that. We don't think of ourselves as a displacer. We think of ourselves as something transformative. If you're from San Francisco, you'll know of a company called Flywheel. They basically created an app for taxi drivers, right? And so instead of becoming the Uber that displaced the taxi and limousine commission, they essentially became the tool that empowered the existing system and made it more efficient. So in our opinion, when you create a framework that allows utilities to look at distributed energy resources as a potential part of their portfolio, you're certainly not displacing them. You're augmenting their generation capabilities and their dispatch capabilities. And that's the way we think about it.
We really appreciate your time, Suleiman. Of course, we didn't get to all the questions, and I just wanted to say for the folks in the audience, there are a couple questions that we think are very relevant to some of the later panels, and I'm hoping that we'll get to them then. So again, thank you so much, Suleiman.